Apparently, JavaScript YouTube is AI YouTube right now. Matt Pocock and Addy Osmani were everywhere in frontend, so of course I knew who they were. Now both ship collections of AI agent skills. These collections cover much more than spec-driven development. I tested only that part. I gave both collections the same feature from one frozen commit. For Pocock, I chose Wayfinder. The route for work too big and unclear for one session. For this feature, it was overkill. Wayfinder spent a huge amount of effort before implementation and still missed a dead run button. Osmani reached implementation much faster, then verification consumed more tokens than the build itself. A later evaluator found another problems. The manual review items reached the app but never appeared on the screen. If I were paying per usage, both complete runs would have cost about $87 each. From the user side, the results felt more or less the same. By the end, you'll know whether either workflow beats planning a smaller phase and testing it properly. So right, this time I decided to experiment with the gray cut as well, and it was pretty good when cleaning out the Talking Cat videos with a given script, but I wanted to try it without a script, just impromptu talks like this one, so that was the feature. Both runs start from the same commit, same system prompt, a clean work tree, and I use Claude Opus 5 in medium effort. Both skill sets accepted the issue tracker, so I used beats as such. For Pocock, I decided to go with the heaviest path, which is Workfinder, which was like a big questionnaire about all the unknowns, where you have to answer a lot of questions and eventually clear out the path to the implementation. After completing the Wayfinder workflow, it handed off the results to spec skill and then it went to ticket skill. And only after that the implementation was clear. So basically, Wayfinder is meant for implementation of large features which are not really clear, and you have to find your way and clear out the details as you go through the questionnaires and options. There is of course much simpler way, which is Grill Me with Docs, and that's the one I've been using heavily in my workflow, and it works pretty well, especially with the codex review. But again, I decided to try something new, and for both of these, I tried the heaviest workflow imaginable. For Osmani skills, everything is more traditional. You start with spec and plan, and then you go through build and test, and the most effort comes into the review phase. When I thought I was basically done, I started doing the review, and it took like the most of the time I spent on the skill. That was kind of surprising, but that's the main difference between these two workflows. Apart from that, I also collected the repo level differences. Pause the video here if you want to learn more. The GitHub counts were taken on August 21, 2026, and the skills were compared on August 13th and 14th. To get started with Pocock's workflow smoothly, you need to understand a few terms. A fog of war means the questions that you know that are ahead, but you don't know the answers yet. So the goal of the planning is just to dissolve this fog and find the answers and have a straight path ahead to implementation. The map in our situation is like an epic issue. It contains the questions and the answers and the steps you need to take to finally get to the straight finish. And eventually I had a huge epic in bits, which was the map, and within it there were some sub-issues, which were these questions. So it's not necessary to go through all of them, but it is more recommended. The more you know ahead, the smoother the implementation will go. It is not entirely true though, you'll see later why. So when I started to go through Wayfinder, it asked me to provide some real footage to test the thing on, and I gave it just a few clips from the previous video. I just didn't provide the script, and I think that was fair. So well, Wayfinder spawned two research agents to find out how the existing mechanism works, and it also asks me to provide the access to the 11 Labs API keys so it can just transcribe in two different ways and compare the results. It also found the bug where we didn't supply any vocabulary to 11 labs, so it wasn't able to recognize words properly. So eventually I spent 102 minutes on the Wayfinder run and spent 34.9 million tokens before implementation. I have to admit I had a session for every single ticket there. I thought after such a huge amount of thorough planning, everything should be working perfectly, and when the implementation completed and I started the app the first time and just dropped some footage on top of it, the run button remained disabled. It was expecting for a script. That was the most obvious UI part, and all this amount of planning didn't catch. The huge amount of planning doesn't really guarantee the great results. You still have to test everything thoroughly and make sure it works. Eventually, when I was evaluating this run, the agents found that 2 of 8 tickets were unreachable in production despite having code and tests. The research itself found a lot of bugs and fixed them, but the most frustrating part was this run button. It just didn't work, and it was pretty obvious to me. There's one more thing I need to add, is how I run the implement workflow in both repos. I basically used this orchestration thingy with subagents where I entitled the root session to be the orchestrator and spawn as many subagents as it needs to implement the tickets or tasks. I use this approach for both skill sets. While it's not something that was recommended on the paper, it really saved me some time. Okay, so with Addy Osmani's agent skills, I don't have to learn any metaphors upfront. I just have to go through the traditional plan, implement, verify pipeline with some quirks, but still it is much more recognizable for a person who was already working on SDD for quite a while. So when I ran this spec, it asked me basically the same questions that the Grill Me session would ask me, and initially it felt quite the same. It also asked me about the task tracker, and I pointed it to beats, which kind of surprised me because I knew Pocock skills required task tracker, but I didn't know that this one needs it also. So it felt like this comparison will be even more fair. So I gave Osmani skills the same footage I gave to the Pocock skills, and I ran the build in the same ways. So it started to work in parallel for like 66 minutes, and eventually the implementation was complete, and I started the app, and it worked pretty well. Even the run button was working from the start, which was kind of surprising, so I thought I just got the same result just for much lesser amount of time. The next day I realized that I went only through half of the workflow, and there is also testing, verification, and ship. I came back to it, and for some reason the test step, it was just a no operation step because it was running for quite some time, but then it realized like we already have tests here, the implementation step built them for us, so there's nothing we can add. I was really surprised because this feels like the workflow was not optimized well, but then I started the review run and it sounded like the gray cat review loop I used on my work, but there was no loop, it was just reviewing and rejecting, and then I asked it to fix it in a subagent, and it reviewed again and rejected again. So there was like 3 iterations of this before I got finally greenlit, and after that I ran the ship command, and it felt kind of similar to the ship command I have in my own workflow. It just ran 3 sub-agents on the code, provided some fixes to the findings, and that was it. So looking at the numbers right now, the verification step consumed about 45 million tokens. The build consumed roughly 42 million. So in this run, we caught the bugs after the implementation in the review step. There was not much of the upfront planning, but there was a lot of verification in the end. And given the instructions that Anthropic provides on how to use Claude Code, this approach is probably even better because they are like, you don't need to plan much upfront, you don't need to restrict the agent, you can just trust it and give it some freedom, and then it will work to its best. Alright, so at the end, let's pull up some numbers. Pocock used 107.7 million tokens, and Osmani used 93.8 million. Osmani's method used more smaller sub-agents, and Pocock kept rereading one large main conversation. The usage price was like almost identical. Pocock was $87.25 and Osmani was $86.46. And again, I used the heaviest workflow from the Pococks, and from the Osmani's workflow, I used the most straightforward one, but there are always other skills to make it last longer. This situation, Pocock took like 82 minutes longer, excluding the idle overnight time. The Osmani method felt leaner because it took much lesser time to get the running up, but the review step was surprisingly big one, so eventually we ended up at roughly the same token usage. Pocock skill built more mechanisms, but some of those remained unimplemented. It also promised me the inline editing, but somehow it forgot to do it, and I wasn't able to edit the misrecognized words manually. Well, Osmani built less, but made sure it was working. And later, independent agent evaluation still found some implementation gaps. In the Osmani branch, there were more tested failure cases, and it even caught a bug pertaining to a potential data loss and crashes. The most surprising part here was that the final cost was merely the same. I thought that the fat Wayfinder workflow will take me hours and hours like BMAT, and it eventually did, but so did Osmani's. Okay, so deep planning actually was pretty useful, and it surfaced a lot of real questions and found a lot of bugs before the implementation. But it wasn't like 100%, and for instance, in this run, it didn't really verify the Python to Swift connection. The repeated code review from the Addy Osmani skillset actually improved the safety and caught a lot of edge cases. But all those reviewers, planners, and verifiers, they only concentrated on the code, but that was not enough. Eventually, you have to verify the app manually by clicking around and making sure that every single button works, that every implemented feature is actually working the way it was promised, and that everything is present there. I think maybe if we were going with smaller steps and verifying everything in between, that would work much better and the text editor would actually be working. And unit tests are great and easy to write, but they don't cover everything. It's a good security layer to have, but it doesn't guarantee that the app is 100% functional. You still have to verify everything manually and make sure you get everything fixed before moving on. So what would I use? I think we don't necessarily have to choose between these two. For my day-to-day work, I use GrillMe with docs, and it's been working pretty well, especially when going with the adversarial codex review. In the end, I have a pipeline, the review pipeline, which very resembles what we have in Osmani's skill sets. About the Wayfinder skill, I would probably use it only when I have a big and vague feature ahead and I have a lot of time for research, so I can just go ahead and spend some tokens and split it into phases and then go grill me with each phase and verify between each phases. As for Osmani, it gives you more predictable life cycle, something that we are used to after all these generations of SDD frameworks. And the review and ship phases, they found and fixed quite a few defects that would have probably gone unnoticed. There are many useful skills in both collections apart from the SDD pipeline. Pocock has this improved code-based architecture skill, and it came up with like top 5 findings and stored them into HTML, so I was able to spawn subagents for each one of those and get them fixed. Osmani provides skills for something called DAO-driven development for adversarial checks and security and hardening for production risks. So yeah, both collections contain many more skills and you have to find some time to explore them. So which collection have you tried on real projects and which worked for you and which didn't? Please let me know in the comment. Okay, thank you very much for watching this video. I hope you appreciate this brand new studio look. Thanks for your amazing support, and if you like this video, go ahead and watch the legendary SDD workflow comparison. I compared BMAT, SpecKit and OpenSpec there. We need to finally reach 100k views on that one. Thank you.